It's the week ending Saturday the 4th of May, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Venezuela's President Maduro claiming victory after an attempted coup, Defense Secretary Gavin Williams being sacked after investigation into a Security Council leak, and 500 years after his death, the verification of a second known portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Ollie Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team are Jamie Timpson, Cameron Tate, and Rebecca Gilley. And starting the show this week is Rebecca. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Well, I can tell you, but it'll have to stay between us.
Apparently, Pope Francis asked Catholics to give up gossiping for Lent. And he continued the crusade against gossiping when a group of 230 hairdressers visited the Vatican. He urged them to resist the temptation to gossip with their clients at the salon. I assume at the barbershop, too, because guys do the same thing. You know.
Whoopi Goldberg speaking on The View on Monday. Rebecca, why has this story about the Pope got your attention?
Well, it's been a very heavy week for gossip-related stories. As we just heard in that clip, Pope Francis has kind of launched a crusade on gossip and how harmful and damaging it is, and he's urged Catholics not to participate in, scuttlebutt.
I don't know if it's a wise idea to use the word crusade lightly in the context of Catholicism, but anyway.
He's on a bloodless crusade against gossip.
Sure.
But there's been another story this week about gossip. This is about a town in the Philippines called Binalonan, kind of remote town about 3 hours north of Manila, where the local authorities have banned gossiping. It's called a chismis in the Philippines, is how they refer to it. And he's saying it gets particularly bad in the summer because people start gathering under shady trees and they start exchanging rumours about their neighbours. It leads to feuds, disputes, even court cases. And so from now on, you will be charged the equivalent of £3 if you're caught gossiping, and you will have to do litter picking.
But hold on, court gossiping? I mean, what's the criteria?
Well, people have been punished already under it, and I think it was the chief of police there has said that nobody has been charged for a second time. So the implication seems to be that they're learning their lesson.
They've been killed.
So they've either disappeared or they've reformed their ways.
I mean, Jamie, this is a law that clearly could be abused, isn't it? Any police officer can say, you look like you're gossiping, so £3 fine, please.
Yeah, and you think that it's probably just a good way of closing out any kind of semblance of undercurrent of protest, maybe more readily. How is protests really done except through scurrilous gossip up until the point where you say, this is what I want to do, I want to go out on the streets and make stuff happen. So it seems like a way for the government to crack down on people they're not a big fan of.
How do you police gossiping, though, Cameron?
This is something that I've been rattling my brains over for quite a fair amount of time now. Because I think, how do you spot someone that's gossiping? If they're gathering under trees, do you go over to them and say, excuse me, are you gossiping? Or can you dish some gossip, and then if someone starts gossiping, then you arrest them?
The classic gossip honey trap.
Or is it someone that raises their hand to their mouth while talking to someone else?
The Philippines has kind of been in the spotlight for a trend towards authoritarianism recently. So there is definitely that concern that it does give a lot of scope to authorities to intrude on peaceful gatherings and crack down on free speech. Although, the authorities in Binalonan have been very insistent that this is not going to infringe on people's free speech. Although, there's no way to enforce it that won't do that.
Well, do they define what gossip is? I mean, if you're saying, you'll never guess what he did last night when he came home drunk, is that gossip? Or is gossip only, let's overthrow the leadership?
Well, officials are categorising it. They're saying basically it's not an infringement on free speech. It's about protecting innocent civilians from being the subject of slander. So they're framing it as a legal measure.
So like libel laws, which presumably they already had before they introduced a law on gossip.
Well, exactly. That's what makes it suspicious. But they also have advertised it as setting an example to other towns, and that they don't want to be seen as a town where people are gossiped about. But this is something that has been the subject of gossip, rumour, etc. is a really important one politically across Asia, across the world. Obviously, gossip and rumours, do have an influence. But Asia particularly has had some serious issues with this. I mean, it's been presented as a lighthearted story, and in a way it is. But in Sri Lanka, for instance, WhatsApp and Facebook were shut down after the Easter Sunday attacks. That was a security measure, but it's not the first time it's happened in Sri Lanka. They also shut down WhatsApp last year because people were using it to encourage anti-Muslim violence and spread Islamophobic
Okay,
rumours.
but what's that got to do with gossip?
Well,
I mean,
and
that's an encrypted app on which you can, if you want to, organise mass violence. That's not gossip.
Well, this is the thing. It's about spreading fake news. The same thing's happened in India. India's had this spate of lynchings connected to false rumours being spread on WhatsApp that people are kidnapping children. And so when a new person arrives in a town, or, some strangers just stop off for a couple of hours on a journey, it's happened on dozens of occasions that they have been attacked by mob, in some case even killed, because of these false rumours, which are gossip. It's not inciting violence in the sense of we're going to start a Facebook page and call for murder. It's literally people forwarding messages to one another saying, oh, look out, I hear these people might be child kidnappers.
And gossip has been cited many times in the use of shutdowns of social media and the internet as a reason for, from a kind of puritanical perspective as well, like the Pope is saying, of, you don't need the social media it is an evil of social media and it doesn't need to be a part of this. I mean, it all goes back to the Arab Spring because it is connected with protests and with things like that. And there's been something like 400 cases of social media being shut down or internet access being restricted in 40 different countries since then. So it is clearly a way to control the populace.
Yeah, and the Ugandan government tried to impose a tax to access social media for this very reason. They said it's frivolous, it spreads gossip and nonsense, and if people want to indulge in it, they should pay because it's damaging society.
But it spreads gossip and nonsense, Cameron, because that's what people are searching for. I mean, people like this stuff because they find it interesting. It gets traction and goes to the top of their social media feeds because it tickles their fancy. I mean, this is human nature.
Precisely. I mean, it's one of the reasons of why we see so much negativity in the press sometimes is because we get very excited about controversy or things that maybe don't agree with what we believe, and therefore we go and read it, and that can be something that can change our opinion on it. So fake news is essentially gossip on another level, and we will be seeing that online. In this instance, though, it seems very strange because the idea is to kind of nip it in the bud early. So if you catch it while people are talking about it outside, then maybe it won't escalate. But what I see happening is that if you catch people and stop them gossiping in real life, they'll just go on social media and do it.
Exactly. Doesn't it rather miss the point, Rebecca? Because, if people are having a chat under a tree, yes, theoretically that could escalate into a mass-scale protest like Jamie's saying. More likely, the fake news being generated in Russian clickbait farms somewhere is the stuff that's actually the cause, not people having a chat under a tree.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing about this story, I think, is that it kind of highlights something else that I wanted to bring in, which is the massive role of gossip and socializing and spreading information in the developing world. I mean, obviously people gossip the world over, but it is particularly important in the developing world. And I just wanted to end with a sort of, a bit of a optimistic look at gossip and how
you don't get to choose when we're done. I might have many more questions to ask you about this, Rebecca. But go on, you give us your big finish.
It can just be a me special if you like, but just two quick examples of how gossip is actually really helpful and doesn't necessarily need to be condemned out of hand. The first one is there was this really interesting episode of This American Life where they talked about this project in Malawi where they went around and recorded they basically hired people to take notes about what people were gossiping about, and they realised that they were actually saying completely different things among themselves than they were saying when they were talking to NGO workers and government survey takers, and that it actually has changed the way that some NGOs approach subjects like HIV, health, safety, nutrition, etc., based on what people are actually talking about, which is very different to what they might say in a formal setting. And the other one, in East Java, there was a campaign, it was called the Healthy Gossip Campaign, designed to promote breastfeeding and good nutrition practices in mothers. And one of the ways that they did this, it was an ongoing project. They did workshops, etc. But one of the things they did was leverage gossip. So they played out these scenarios where this local gossip was spreading misinformation, and then she was embarrassed to find out that she'd been spreading the wrong information and she should have been spreading correct information. The idea was to leverage the power of gossip to almost, in a good way, almost to shame women into adopting these correct practices.
I also have Holden was meant to be here today.
Have you got a bit of gossip for us about that?
I was a last-minute substitution. We can't say why he's not here.
Sure. Exactly.
But I thought I'd do my best Holden impression and say that there was actually in history quite positive.
I want take us back to the Romans at least.
Well, not the Romans this time, the Greeks.
Okay.
In Athens, their low status women and people, slaves basically, would use gossip as a way to bring down people who were on trial. So they had no kind of legal recourse within Athens, but what they would do is they would inform the person who was a part of the trial about the nature of the conduct of the person, or just gossip about the person involved, and they would be able to bring them down, people that had been wronged in the past, and that was a benefit of gossiping.
But I slightly object to the use of the word gossip in all these examples that you guys are coming up with, because to me gossip may be true but probably isn't. Whereas some of the things you're talking about is about giving power to the powerless, it's about actually speaking truth. That's not really gossip, is it?
I think I want to gossip with you if you think that gossip is mostly stuff that's not true.
That's not the point of gossiping.
Cameron,
look at Pop Bitch.
Cameron, what is the best piece of gossip that you know?
Well, if you said that gossip isn't necessarily always true, I hear the heads of Dennis are considering giving me a massive pay rise. Not sure
See what I mean? This is evidently false.
Not sure if it's what?
Rebecca?
Had an affair with and everybody knows, and everyone's reporting on it outside of the UK, but we can't.
And Jamie? Okay, Cameron, you're up next, and we'll see if you justify that pay rise after this. Cameron, what do you think this week will be remembered for?
If you enjoyed today's episode of The Week Unwrapped, remember to like us on Instagram while you can.
I am nothing without my following. I am nothing without my following. And when people try to hate on me and report me, I want to say to everybody that's been reporting me, think twice, because you're ruining my life. Because I make all of my money online. All of it. And I don't want to lose that. And I know people like to see me be down and be like them and be like the 90%ers, the people that work 9 to 5. That is not me. I am in LA to not be like that.
That was Instagram user Jessie Taylor in an emotional plea on YouTube back in April. Cameron, what is the story here?
Well, bless them, people take Instagram very seriously, don't they? So at Facebook's annual developers conference on Tuesday, known as F8, the company announced that its social media service, Instagram, is trialling a service in Canada of where they won't be showing how many likes your post or posts get on the service. So if you see a picture that you like, normally now you'd click the heart button and it would say 1 of 20,000 likes. Yeah, really made a difference, didn't it? But now instead it'll just say you and other people liked this post.
And what's the point of them doing that?
Well, there are kind of two ways they're going about it. The first one is the very markety approach, which is it will help people discover new and interesting content without judging it based on numbers. But there's also the aspect of people put a lot of emphasis on kind of gauging who they are by how many likes they get on Instagram. The idea is to take that away so that people aren't basically looking for other people's approval.
Except, my understanding of the story is they'll still be able to see how many likes they've got. It's just that the general public won't be able to see it. So you are still going to be judging yourself based on how popular you are, aren't you? You are still going to be fishing for likes.
Definitely. This is kind of like there's two sides to this story. So the one side is it is a step to kind of, because let's say if I'm at school and my best mate is way more popular than I am on Instagram. Let's say I'm getting bullied because of it, because my picture only got 3 likes, whereas his got 1,000. That's not going to be the case anymore. No one's going to be able to see how many likes his post got over mine. So that's one element, but like you said, you're still going to be able to see how many likes that you've got, and you could still show that around the playground if you wanted to, and you can still see how many followers that someone's got.
Is this a positive story, Rebecca?
Yes, in a way. I certainly think there is. I think that Facebook and obviously Instagram have been under so much pressure to kind of improve the experience. We've seen so many stories in the news of young people's mental health suffering because they're, pining over likes and wasting away in search of internet popularity. And so I think it's good in that respect. I think it's actually surprisingly bold because Instagram knows that the hunt for likes is what keeps people coming back. So they are kind of taking a smallish risk in taking that measure away. I mean, obviously, you'll still be able to see the amount of likes you're getting. But as Cam was saying, it takes away that public pressure to compete with your peers. The one thing that I found kind of weird about this is that Ashley Carman wrote an article for The Verge about this. in which she said that they should take away the like function altogether, because she said it incentivizes frivolous content like nudity, food porn, and Instagram-friendly scenarios. And I was like, well, if you took that away, I literally don't know what I would use Instagram for anymore. Yeah. I mean, it's about nudity, food, and Instagram-friendly scenarios. Like, what else is there?
I've got a great account about cars, by the way, so there's no nudity on there,
Is it
I promise
Eye
you.
of the driver?
It is.
At Eye of
It
the
is,
Driver.
yes. That's who I am.
I think
Just smuggle on some promotion for Cameron's side hustle.
he needs his pay rise.
Jamie, what impact do you think this will have on the Instagram community if it is rolled out beyond Canada?
I mean, I think it might have a positive. I think there's lots of ways around it. Basically, if you just screenshot a picture of how many likes you've got, how much your phone is, and then put it up on your account, you're showing everyone how many likes your most recent picture got. That could be a way around it. That's just come out the top of my head. I'm sure if people want validation,
That kind of magic just shoots from the
it's
lip.
from the fingertips.
Yeah.
Is that Trump?
The whole point of social media is partly a validation thing. You know, whether or not it's the explicit point of it, it is something that people continually go back to social media platforms for validation. I think the one interesting question that I think it probably does bring up is what actually is a like? What is the purpose of a like? To give an example, Israel Folau, who is probably one of the best rugby players in the world, he posted a Instagram post recently that was denouncing quite a lot of different people, but mainly homosexuals. And it was liked by 10 England rugby players. And the question of whether or not... So Israel Folau lost his contract at Rugby Australia. He's no longer able to play rugby. The question that was then was, what purpose were the likes that the England rugby players, people like Billy Vunipola and Courtney Lawes, giving by liking that message? Were they endorsing what he was saying, or were they saying... free speech, I'm happy for you to be able to say this, just that kind of thing. And I think this idea, removing likes or even questioning whether their value, actually says, what is the point of them? What are they there for?
Well, one value that we know they have, Cameron, is for the influencer community, as we were just hearing in that clip off YouTube. There are people whose entire business model is they go around taking pictures of themselves in posh hotels, and then they get free trips at other posh hotels because they've got so many thousand likes. And that, I presume, is going to have an impact on those people. There's a whole industry built around it.
Yeah, precisely, and especially if you're trying to, make your career on Instagram, which I know we joked about it earlier, but it's people do make a very good living from it. They're going to get people, let's say PRs, contacting them based on the amount of likes that they have, because likes is a great way of showing engagement. You could have a massive following, but you could pay 10 quid and get 2,000 followers. Whereas those likes show that how many people are kind of looking and are actually appreciating your post. So it could have a really big impact on them. Yes, it would be some influencers that, let's say their whole career is based on just posting pictures of themselves, but people use Instagram as a marketplace as well. It is really important.
And in terms of Facebook's larger strategy as well, it seems significant to me, Rebecca, that this is happening in Canada because, okay, yes, it isn't the USA, but it is Canada. It's not like they've tested this in, Zambia or something. They have tested this in an English-speaking place that has a similar kind of demographic to America, but is just a bit smaller. They're serious about this, aren't they? And this will be probably rolled out to the whole of the world. And what does that tell us about how Facebook are trying to combat all the stories you referred to?
I mean, it seems likely that it's going to end up being rolled out. And I think, on the whole, that will probably be a good thing. I guess where it starts to get a bit sketchy is how much impact, Jamie, you were talking earlier about what the likes really mean. And of the things you could try and actively change on social media platforms to make people's experience a bit happier, that probably is one of the most low impact ones because, as we were saying, what a like actually means is a bit nebulous. It's the same thing on Twitter, the whole retweets do not equal endorsements. The whole idea of how we engage with one another on social media, it is all a bit murky. And, those rugby players, this is the thing. This is where I think it might actually be a good thing to take away the like function, is that there's so much mindless liking and mindless scrolling. Like, those England rugby players were not reading that homophobic post. I bet maybe 1 out of 10 of them actually read it. People just use it as a signifier to one another of, I like you. You know, those bikini shots that people are liking, they're not liking them because they're, oh, what a lovely bikini. This is very well lit. You know, it's just a cry for attention. And that's all likes are, just feeding this endless, drive for attention. And
There's a more
so it might
serious
actually be good.
issue as well, which is that alongside this, Facebook, so it was announced at the F8, and alongside it, Facebook said that they wanted Facebook groups to be a much more prevalent way. So, people finding other people who are sharing a hobby or an interest. And then they also are making things encrypted, more encrypted. Messenger's going to be more encrypted. There's an element of them shutting off the public to the inner workings of the social media, and I think this is an example of it. Making it more private, and that spreads disinformation, and that's more likely to.
It does make them more powerful, doesn't it, Cameron? Because we've seen this with Facebook trying to shut down right-wing commentators, for example. I'm talking about the extreme right-wing here. One of the difficult issues for them is on the one hand they get a good headline that they're taking down someone who's being overtly racist or something like that, but the problem is you can see however many hundreds of thousands of people like their posts. If you remove the function for the public to see whether these people have traction, it becomes completely up to them who they feature, who they show, and who they take down, and there's not that accountability there.
It is true. I mean, if we're really looking at this, yes, they're hiding the number of likes, but it's still there. You can go and you would still be able to go and like a post, and that's what Instagram and Facebook would still use for their algorithm. So even if they're saying here, this will just get people to go and look at new posts that are based on how they look and not based on what they're liked or the amount of likes they get. Their algorithm is still going to be pushing that towards you.
Yeah, but the point is
popular.
Something could secretly be massively popular, and Facebook could choose not to promote it in their algorithm because no one's going to know that it is.
I think if it's promoted through Facebook's algorithm, that's where you're going to get massive traction on likes. So you won't really necessarily be able to tell how popular it is, unless it comes from an account with a massive following. I'm not sure if that would really happen.
Okay, one last story to come after this. And so finally this week, it's Jamie. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
This was the week a war of words became something more.
Cameroon has long been seen as a peaceful nation in a troubled region. The country has lived in relative harmony, even as Cameroon's army fights Boko Haram in the far north region, with support from the U.S. military. The Central African country is bilingual. The majority of Cameroonians speak French, and around 20% of the population are English speakers. But the English-speaking minority has long complained they are treated as second-class citizens. In late 2016, their struggle for equal rights turned violent. Now, the country is on the brink of civil war.
That was Siobhan O'Grady of the Washington Post in a report published back in February. But Jamie, civil war in Cameroon that she refers to there over language is your story of this week. Why?
Because this week, the head of an aid agency spoke at a UN conference to say that there was an international silence over the civil war in Cameroon.
Well, let's shed some light here then, Jamie. What is the civil war in Cameroon about?
Well, yeah, so a very, very short, brief history lesson of Cameroon, because I know some people out there might not know as much as we all do.
Sure.
In 1884, Cameroon was colonised by Germany, and then during the First World War, we and the French, we being the British, took control of Cameroon and then divided it between us. The way that it was split was that 80% of the country became French-speaking, while only 20% were English-speaking. The problem, it seemed like it was fine. English-speaking part of the country was run by, so the infrastructure was all put in place were English-speaking, so the judges and the police and all of that. And it was like a smaller English-speaking state. But in 2016, as the Washington Post clips said, there was a peaceful demonstration when the president, Paul Biya, who is 85 and has just been elected for his 7th 7-year term.
Okay, we'll return to that.
He locked up all of the demonstrators of a peaceful demonstration that was being put against because the government had basically removed English-speaking judges from the area and replaced them with French-speaking judges. People living there were like, this isn't very fair. We've had a whole time of having people speaking our language in the infrastructure, and he was saying, I just don't care. I'm not going to lock you up.
So okay. Like I say, let's park the issue about the age of the president and any allegations about how he's controlling the country. But just on the point of view of English speakers being aggravated that there is French infrastructure. Is that really causing a civil war?
That's kind of a red herring issue because it's not so much about language. Like in so many other places around the world, it's about the government's heavy-handed response to a minority within the country. So the issue...
So the minority being English speakers, actually?
Yeah. So in 1961, the people of English-speaking West Cameroon were asked to decide whether they wanted to unite with French-speaking East Cameroon or whether they wanted to become a state of Nigeria, which was a choice that they weren't really keen on either. They wanted to be their own state. They call themselves Ambazonia, after Ambas Bay, which is in the region. But ultimately, it was just they decided to unite with Cameroon, but it's never really been a very peaceful union. There's always been some friction. And so basically in 2016, 2017, that erupted into violence over this heavy-handed push to replace... So the problem with the English-speaking, French-speaking judges is that the French judges follow the French-style legal system, the civil justice system of, the Napoleonic system, whereas the English-speaking judges, they were implementing English-style common law. So it would be about replacing the legal system, essentially. There was similar unrest over the idea of teaching French as the main language in schools, basically just this program of forced assimilation into the French majority. So, but it's not about language, it's about this feeling that they are being persecuted by the government, that their culture is being eroded, and that they're basically being subsumed into the Francophone majority.
So, I mean, for the head of the aid agency to highlight this as an issue, then, it clearly is worse than you might expect from that outline. I mean, that sounds kind of cerebral, what Rebecca just said, a fight about the law and whether the law follows an English system or a French system. That doesn't seem like something I'd want to die over. So what's happened?
Well, it's not just that as well, because Cameroon still has a massive problem with the Boko Haram terrorism group.
Yeah, they're in the north, aren't they?
They are in the north. But from what I understand, the USA provides aid to Cameroon to fend them off. But the government is now using that to keep the English minority at bay.
And obviously the kind of US have said that they will step in if they see that forces that have been trained by the US to deal with terrorism are being used to basically to block the separatists. Just on a numbers front, there's been at least 500 people killed, 100,000 people have been displaced, a lot of them into Nigeria where they don't want to go, but because it's English speaking, that's what they see as an easy move. There's been kind of a ramping up of violence in recent years, which is what the aid agency guy was talking about.
But what should happen in terms of response from the West, though? Because, I mean, as you say, the US are already involved, and it might be partly because they're involved that this is problematic. So then immediately you're pitting countries against the biggest power in the West if they get involved. And then the obvious alliance would be Britain supporting the English speakers and France supporting the French. You don't really want a civil war in Europe about this.
Well, I don't think it's a case of... I don't think military intervention or anything like that is necessarily the...
Even financial.
Well, the problem is that I think this is a situation where, Cameroon has so many problems, but it has for a long time been seen as a relatively successful state. And I think that it's not beyond repair, and that if there was just the attention from the international community, that pressure would go a long way to persuading the government to take a lighter approach. Because at the moment, the reports coming out of Cameroon are really shocking. Reports of government troops going into villages and just shooting dead every man that they see in the English-speaking regions. That is really awful. And I think that the fact that there hasn't been any real international pressure on the Cameroonian government is quite shocking.
And it goes back to the same things that we were saying about when we were talking about Bouteflika in Algeria, is that element of there is quite a young country being ruled by an 85-year-old man who has been there he wants to be there for 49 years. And his rule of oppression, I mean, he's locked up the opposition leader who has gone out on record and said that he wants a resolution to this crisis, and he's locked him up because he basically claimed that he won the election last year. And so you have this sense of, if there was, as Rebecca was saying, if there was international pressure on him to stand down, in the same way that Algeria, there has been and there was, particularly from the diaspora as well, because there are English-speaking Cameroonians in America that have been putting pressure on local government. And so that kind of thing could be a real change.
But what about my point, Cameron, about the French? I mean, surely a lot of French people would instinctively, just because they speak French there, want to support the French-speaking populace.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that... Because there really isn't that much being discussed of it at the moment, I'm not sure what kind of opinion they would have. Again, I'm hearing about it for the first time this week. I wouldn't look at it and say that I would support the Anglophones just because they speak English. it's incredibly complicated.
Is it actually not really getting the attention it deserves because it doesn't have a great impact on the West? Is that it, really?
I think actually it's what you were saying earlier, Ollie, the idea that it seems like quite a cerebral conflict, and it maybe seems almost a little bit quaint, because what's happening in a lot of post-colonial African states now is that there's more attention on native languages and using English and French as kind of lingua francas. And so I think it seems almost like a bit of an old-fashioned conflict of, and people think it's, should we speak English or should we speak French? When it's not really about that at all. It is about oppression and overbearing governments and violence.
And there's a hangover from the colonial aspect of just that thing of like, whoa,
there's an ickiness about
yeah,
wanting to get involved.
we don't want to get involved in that again after what we've done.
Yeah. Okay, fascinating. Thank you, Jamie, and thank you to Rebecca and Cameron as well. That is it for this edition of The Week Unwrapped. Remember, you can discover our entire back catalogue with an optional dubbed track for francophones. Jamie is voiced by Gérard Depardieu when you subscribe to The Week Unwrapped on your podcast app of choice. And also, you can receive, yes you, 6 issues of The Week magazine for £1 and get a free Moleskine notebook branded with The Week if you go to theweek.co.uk/offer and enter the promo code podcast. I've been Ollie Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producers Matt Hill and Chica Ayres at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, au revoir.